The flames painted the walls orange and red as Danny Cole brought his cargo ship down through the smoke. He had expected a quiet delivery run to Outpost 7. He had expected to drop off medical supplies, collect his payment, and move on to the next job. But the moment his ship broke through the clouds above the mining station, he knew something had gone terribly wrong. The station was burning. Explosions tore through the main hub every few seconds. Ships he did not recognize sat on the landing platforms, and armed figures moved between the buildings with weapons raised. Danny had seen this kind of destruction before. Raiders. The Syndicate, most likely. They were known for attacking remote outposts, killing anyone who resisted and taking the rest as slaves. Danny's hands tightened on the controls. The smart thing to do was turn around, fly away, report the attack to the nearest patrol and let someone else deal with it. He was just a cargo hauler. He had no weapons worth mentioning. He had no training for combat situations. Getting involved would likely get him killed. But then he heard the screaming. His communication system had picked up an open channel from the station. Through the static and noise, he could hear voices crying for help. He could hear children calling for their parents. And somewhere in that chaos, a single voice cut through everything else. A young voice. A child begging anyone to find her. Danny closed his eyes. He thought about his sister. He thought about the colony fire 15 years ago when he had been too slow to reach her. He thought about how that failure had followed him across every planet and station, an empty stretch of space since then. He had spent his whole life running from that memory. Maybe it was time to run towards something instead. He brought his ship down behind a storage complex on the far side of the station. The raiders had not noticed him yet. He grabbed his emergency pack, checked the small pistol he kept for protection against pirates, and stepped out into the smoke. The heat hit him immediately. The air tasted like metal and burning plastic. Danny pulled his jacket over his mouth and moved through the wreckage, following the sound of that young voice. It was weaker now, more afraid, but it guided him through the maze of collapsed walls and shattered equipment like a thread in the darkness. He found her in a storage bay that had partially caved in. She was small, maybe 12 years old by human standards, with pale blue skin and large dark eyes that reflected the firelight. Danny had met a few of them during his travels. They were a peaceful species known for their brilliant scientists and fragile bodies. They avoided conflict whenever possible because they simply could not survive it the way other species could. This girl was badly hurt. A piece of metal from the collapsed ceiling had cut deep into her side and dark blue blood pooled beneath her. She looked up at Danny with pure terror in her eyes. He understood. Humans had a reputation in the galaxy. Violent, unpredictable, dangerous. She probably thought he was here to finish what the raiders had started. Danny held up his hand slowly. He spoke in a calm, quiet voice. He told her his name. He told her he was not going to hurt her. He told her he was going to help her, but she needed to stay very still and very quiet. The girl did not respond at first. She just stared at him with those huge dark eyes, her small body trembling. Then she whispered something in her own language. Danny did not understand the words, but he recognized the tone. She was asking him why. Why would a human help her? He did not have time to answer. The sound of boots on metal flooring echoed through the damaged corridor outside the storage bay. Soldiers. They were searching the wreckage for survivors. Danny knew what would happen if they found this girl. She would become property, a number, a thing to be sold. Danny moved quickly. He positioned himself between the girl and the entrance to the storage bay. He checked his pistol. 6 shots. Not enough. Not nearly enough. But he was not going to let them take her. He had failed to save someone small and scared once before. He would not fail again. The girl grabbed his sleeve with a weak, trembling hand. She looked up at him with tears cutting clean lines through the dust on her blue cheeks. She told him her name. She said it like she wanted someone to remember it, like she expected to die and wanted at least one person in the universe to know who she had been. Danny knelt beside her and looked directly into her eyes. He told her that she was going to live. He told her that he was going to get her out of here. He told her that he had come a very long way and gone through a lot of trouble, and he was not about to let some raiders ruin his delivery schedule. Almost smiled at that, almost. The boots were getting closer. Danny could hear voices now, soldiers calling to each other, coordinating their search pattern. They would reach this storage bay in less than a minute. Danny had to make a choice. He could hide, stay quiet, and hope they passed by without looking too closely, or he could fight. He thought about his ship waiting behind the storage complex. He thought about the smoke and the flames and the screaming on the communication channel. He thought about small hands still gripping his sleeve like he was the only solid thing in a world that was falling apart. Danny stood up. He moved toward the entrance of the storage bay. He pressed his back against the wall beside the door and raised his pistol. His heart was pounding so hard he could feel it in his throat. His hands were shaking, but his mind was clear, clearer than it had been in 15 years. The first soldier stepped through the doorway. He was tall and lean, with gray skin and 4 arms that each held a different weapon. He turned his head toward, his thin mouth curling into a cruel smile. He never saw Danny standing beside him. He never saw the human raise his pistol. He only heard the shot that ended his search forever. The sound echoed through the burning station like a promise, like a warning, like the beginning of something that would not stop until it was safe or Danny Cole was dead. And somewhere in the back of his mind, Danny realized he was okay with either outcome. Because for the first time since that colony fire took his sister, he was exactly where he needed to be. The soldier fell hard. His weapons clattered against the metal floor as his body crumpled, and the sound brought 2 more soldiers rushing through the doorway. Danny had expected this. He had positioned himself in the only spot where the narrow entrance would force them to come through one at a time instead of surrounding him. The second soldier came in fast with his weapon already firing. The shots went wide, hitting the wall behind Danny and sending sparks into the smoky air. Danny returned fire twice. The first shot missed. The second caught the soldier in the chest and dropped him beside his fallen companion. The third soldier was smarter. He stopped just outside the doorway and started shouting orders into his communication device. Danny knew what that meant. Reinforcements were coming. He had maybe 2 minutes before this storage bay would be flooded with more soldiers than he could possibly handle. He turned back to. The young girl was watching him with wide eyes. She had pressed herself against the far wall, her injured side still bleeding slowly onto the floor. Danny crossed the room in 3 quick steps and knelt beside her. He told her they needed to move. She nodded weakly but did not speak. Danny opened his emergency pack and found the medical supplies he always carried: a bandage, antiseptic spray, painkillers designed for multiple species. He worked quickly, cleaning the wound in her side and wrapping it tight enough to slow the bleeding, made small sounds of pain but did not cry out. She was stronger than she looked. The third soldier finally made his move. He came through the doorway firing in all directions, hopping to hit something in the chaos. Danny shielded with his own body and felt a burning pain tear across his left shoulder. He had been hit. The wound was not deep, but it hurt badly enough to make his vision blur for a moment. Danny pushed through the pain. He raised his pistol with his good arm and fired his last 3 shots. 2 missed. The third found its target. The soldier stumbled backward and collapsed against the doorframe, his weapon falling from his grip. Silence followed. The only sounds were the distant crackling of flames and rapid breathing beside him. Danny checked his pistol. Empty. He looked around the storage bay for anything he could use as a weapon and spotted one of the fallen soldiers nearby. They carried multiple weapons. Danny could take one. He moved toward the body and grabbed a compact rifle from the soldier's belt. He checked it quickly. Full charge. Good. He was back in business. Called his name softly. She was trying to stand, using the wall for support. Her legs were shaking badly, and her face had gone very pale. Danny realized she had lost more blood than he had thought. If he did not get her proper medical treatment soon, the bandage would not matter. He crossed back to her and lifted her gently into his arms. She weighed almost nothing. Were light compared to humans, their bones hollow like birds. Wrapped her thin arms around his neck and pressed her face against his chest. He could feel her trembling. Danny moved toward the back of the storage bay, away from the entrance where more soldiers would surely come. He remembered the layout of the station from the delivery manifest he had studied on his way here. There should be an access tunnel nearby that led toward the landing platforms. If he could reach his ship, he could get to safety. He found the access panel behind a pile of fallen equipment. It took him nearly a minute to clear enough debris to reach it, and every second felt like an hour. He could hear more soldiers arriving at the storage bay entrance, shouting to each other about the dead bodies they had found. Danny pulled the access panel open and slipped through with Still in his arms. The tunnel beyond was dark and narrow, barely wide enough for him to walk without turning sideways. But it led away from the soldiers, and that was all that mattered. They moved through the darkness for what felt like a long time, had stopped trembling. Her breathing had become slow and steady. For a moment, Danny feared she had lost consciousness, but then she spoke in a quiet voice that echoed slightly in the tunnel. She asked him why he had come back for her. She said that humans were supposed to be selfish. Her teachers had told her that humans only cared about their own kind. They had warned her that if she ever met a human, she should run away as fast as possible. Danny did not answer right away. He kept walking through the darkness, adjusting his grip on to keep her comfortable despite his wounded shoulder. Finally, he told her that her teachers were wrong. He said that humans cared about lots of things. Sometimes they cared too much. Sometimes they did stupid, dangerous things because they could not stand to watch someone suffer. Was quiet for a moment. Then she asked if coming to save her had been a stupid, dangerous thing. Danny laughed despite everything. He told her it was probably the most dangerous thing he had done in his entire life, but he also told her that he would do it again without hesitation, because some things were more important than being safe. The tunnel ended at another access panel. Danny could see light coming through the cracks around its edges. He sat down carefully and pressed his ear against the panel, listening for any sounds on the other side. He heard nothing. He pushed the panel open slowly and looked out. They had emerged near the landing platforms just as he had hoped. He could see his ship, the rough landing, sitting exactly where he had left it, but he could also see the soldiers surrounding it. At least a dozen of them, all armed, all watching the area for any sign of survivors. A voice boomed across the landing platform from a speaker system. Commander Vex, the leader of the raiding party, was making an announcement. He told any remaining survivors that they had one chance to surrender. He promised that anyone who came forward willingly would be treated fairly. He said they would be given food and shelter and transported to a place where they could start new lives. Danny knew better. He had heard these promises before from other raiders in other places. They meant nothing. Surrender meant slavery. It meant being sold to the highest bidder and worked until there was nothing left. He looked at. She was watching him with those large dark eyes, waiting to see what he would decide. He looked back at the soldiers surrounding his ship. He looked at the sealed emergency bulkhead blocking the path to the main station. They were trapped. Behind them were soldiers who wanted them dead or captured. In front of them was an army guarding their only escape route. Danny had an injured alien child in his care, a wounded shoulder that was growing numb, and a stolen rifle with only one full charge. But he also had something they did not expect. He had a reason to keep fighting that went beyond survival. He had a promise he had made to a scared little girl with blue skin and dark eyes who reminded him of someone he had lost a long time ago. Danny pulled close and whispered that he had a plan. It was not a good plan. It was probably a terrible plan, but it was the only one he had. Looked up at him and nodded. She told him she trusted him. 3 simple words that hit Danny harder than the bullet had. He took a deep breath and began to move. Danny pulled back into the access tunnel and sealed the panel behind them. The soldiers had not spotted them yet, but that would change soon. They needed another way to reach the ship. They needed help. The maintenance tunnels beneath Outpost 7 stretched in every direction like the roots of a dying tree. Danny chose a path that led away from the landing platforms, hopping to find another access point that was not surrounded by enemies. Clung to his back now, her arms wrapped around his neck while he moved through the narrow passages. They had been walking for nearly 10 minutes when Danny heard a sound ahead. Footsteps. Someone else was in the tunnels. He pressed himself against the wall and raised his rifle, ready for another fight. A woman stepped around the corner and froze when she saw the weapon pointed at her face. She was human. Her clothes were torn and covered in soot, and she had a nasty cut above her left eye that had dried into a dark line down her cheek. She held her hands up slowly and told Danny not to shoot. Danny lowered the rifle but did not put it away. He asked her who she was and what she was doing in the tunnels. The woman said her name was Tessa Marsh. She was an engineer who had come to the station 3 days ago to repair some mining equipment. When the attack started, she had hidden in the tunnels and stayed there ever since. She had been looking for a way to escape when she heard Danny and moving through the darkness. Lifted her head from Danny's shoulder and looked at Tessa with tired eyes. She asked if Tessa knew what had happened to the other people on the station. She asked about her father, who had been the administrator of Outpost 7. Tessa's expression softened. She told that approximately 15 survivors had made it to the reactor control room in the center of the station. The emergency blast doors there were strong enough to hold back the soldiers for a while. She did not know if his father was among them, but there was a chance. Hope flickered in dark eyes. She looked at Danny and said they had to help the other survivors. Danny agreed, but he knew they could not fight through an army of soldiers with one rifle and wounded bodies. They needed a different approach. Tessa had been thinking the same thing. She explained that the reactor control room would lose power in about 2 hours. When that happened, the blast doors would fail and would break through. The survivors needed rescue before then, but they had jammed all communication signals from the station. There was no way to call for help. Danny told her about his ship. The rough landing had a powerful communication array that could cut through the jamming signal. If they could reach it, they could send a distress call to any patrol ships in the sector. But the ship was surrounded by soldiers. The three of them sat in the darkness of the tunnel and tried to come up with a plan. Tessa knew the station better than anyone. She had spent the past 3 days mapping every tunnel, every maintenance hatch, every weak point in the structure. She said there was a fuel storage depot near the landing platforms. If they could overload one of the fuel cells, it would create an explosion big enough to draw the away from the ships. Danny saw the problem immediately. Someone would need to trigger the overload manually. The fuel depot was too far from any remote access point. Whoever did it would be caught in the explosion. Tessa nodded slowly. She said she knew. She said she was willing to do it if it meant saving the others. Danny shook his head. He told her that was not an acceptable plan. He was not going to let anyone sacrifice themselves while he flew away to safety. There had to be another way. Had been quiet during this conversation, but now she reached into her torn clothing and pulled out a small device. It was a beacon, she explained. A silent distress signal that her father had given her when she was young. He had told her to activate it if she was ever in danger. She had pressed the button when the attack first started, hours ago. Danny stared at the tiny device in her pale blue hand. He asked if it was working, said she did not know. The beacon was old. Her father had given it to her years ago, but if it was working, then a patrol ship might already be on its way. Tessa pulled out a small scanner from her pocket and held it near the beacon. After a moment, she smiled. The beacon was transmitting. She could detect a faint response signal coming from somewhere beyond the moon's orbit. A ship was coming, but based on the signal strength, it was still at least 40 minutes away. 40 minutes. They needed to survive for 40 minutes while surrounded by enemies, trapped in a burning station with wounded bodies and limited weapons. It seemed impossible, but impossible was better than hopeless. Danny made a decision. They would create the distraction as Tessa had suggested, but they would use a timer instead of a manual trigger. It would give them less control over the explosion, but it meant no one had to die to make it happen. Tessa started to argue, but Danny cut her off. He told her that her knowledge of the station made her too valuable to lose. He told her that needed someone to look after her if anything happened to him. He told her that he had already made his choice the moment he landed on this burning moon, and that choice was to get everyone out alive. The three of them moved through the tunnels toward the fuel depot, stayed close to Danny, her small hand gripping his jacket whenever the passage got too dark. Tessa led the way, navigating the maze of pipes and cables with practiced ease. They reached the depot without encountering any soldiers. The fuel cells sat in rows along the walls, each one containing enough energy to power a small ship for months. Tessa found the controls and began setting up the overload sequence. She set the timer for 15 minutes, which should give them enough time to reach the landing platform from another access point. Danny watched the numbers appear on the display. 15 minutes. That was all the time they had to cross the station, avoid the patrols, and reach his ship before everything went wrong. Tugged at his sleeve. She looked up at him with those large dark eyes and asked a question that hit him like a physical blow. She asked what would happen if the plan failed. She asked what would happen if they caught them before they reached the ship. Danny knelt beside her so they were at the same level. He looked into her eyes and told her the truth. He said that if the plan failed, he would find another plan. And if that plan failed, he would find another one after that. He told her that he was not going to stop trying until she was safe, no matter what stood in their way. Studied his face for a long moment. Then she asked why. She asked why a stranger would do so much for someone he had never met before today. Danny thought about his sister. He thought about the flames and the screaming and the moment when he realized he had been too late. He thought about all the years he had spent running from that memory. He told that sometimes people needed help, and sometimes the person who could help them was standing right there with a choice to make. He said that the choice was easy. The hard part was living with the consequences. Tessa finished setting the timer and stepped back from the controls. She told them it was done. 15 minutes until the explosion. Danny stood up and lifted onto his back again. He checked his rifle one more time. He looked at Tessa and nodded. They started running. The tunnels blurred past as Danny ran with on his back. His wounded shoulder screamed in protest with every step, but he pushed the pain away and focused on the path ahead. Tessa led them through passages that grew narrower and darker as they moved closer to the landing platform. They emerged from an access hatch behind a row of cargo containers just as the fuel depot exploded. The blast shook the entire station. Fire and debris shot into the sky, and the soldiers surrounding the landing platform turned toward the destruction with weapons raised. Orders flew through their communication systems. Most of them started running toward the explosion to investigate. Danny waited until the crowd had thinned before moving. He counted only 4 soldiers still guarding the ships, 4 against 1 rifle and 2 wounded survivors. Those were not great odds, but they were better than before. Tessa touched his arm and pointed toward a supply vehicle parked near the edge of the platform. She whispered that she could reach it and use it to create another distraction. Danny did not want to split up, but he saw the logic in her plan. One distraction could draw away the remaining guards long enough for him to get aboard the rough landing. He nodded and told her to be careful. Tessa gave him a tired smile and slipped away into the shadows between the cargo containers. Danny shifted its weight on his back and began moving toward his ship. He stayed low, using every piece of cover he could find. The 4 soldiers were spread out across the platform, their attention divided between watching for survivors and checking their communication devices for updates about the explosion. He made it halfway to the ship before one of the soldiers spotted him. The alien shouted a warning and raised his weapon. Danny dropped behind a metal crate just as energy bolts scorched the air where his head had been, buried her face against his neck and held on. The sound of a vehicle engine roared across the platform. Tessa had found the supply transport. She came flying around the corner at full speed, heading straight toward the group of soldiers. 2 of them dove out of the way. The third was not fast enough. The transport clipped him and sent him spinning across the ground. Danny seized the moment. He sprinted toward the rough landing with everything he had left. The boarding ramp was down. The ship's hull was marked with scorched damage from the earlier fighting, but it looked intact. 20 meters, 15, 10. A figure stepped out from behind the ship and blocked his path. Commander Vex was tall and lean, with gray skin that seemed to absorb the light around him. His face was covered in old scars that told stories of battles won and enemies destroyed. He held no weapon in his 4 hands. He did not need one. Everyone in the sector knew that Vex had killed dozens of people with his bare hands. Danny stopped running. He could feel shaking against his back. He slowly lowered her to the ground and pushed her behind him, keeping himself between her and the commander. Vex looked at Danny with cold amusement in his yellow eyes. He said he was impressed. Most humans would have run away when they saw the attack on the station. Most humans would have saved themselves and left the aliens to their fate. But Danny had stayed. Danny had fought. Danny had killed several of his soldiers. He asked Danny why. What possible reason could a human have for risking his life for a child who meant nothing to him? Danny kept his rifle pointed at Vex's chest. His arms were shaking from exhaustion and blood loss, but his voice was steady when he answered. He said that needed help. That was the only reason he needed. Vex laughed. It was an ugly sound like metal scraping against stone. He said that Danny was either very brave or very stupid. He said that either way, Danny was going to die on this platform. 2 more soldiers appeared behind Vex, their weapons trained on Danny. One of them grabbed by the arm and pulled her away from Danny's protection. She cried out and struggled, but she was too weak and too small to break free. Danny tried to move toward her, but Vex was faster. The commander crossed the distance between them in a heartbeat and slammed his fist into Danny's chest. The impact lifted Danny off his feet and sent him crashing into the side of his own ship. His rifle flew from his grip and clattered across the platform. Danny tried to stand. Vex hit him again and again. Each blow felt like being struck by a machine. Danny's vision blurred. He tasted blood in his mouth. His body screamed at him to stop moving, to give up, to accept that he had lost. But then he heard crying. He heard her calling his name. He heard the terror in her voice, and something inside him refused to break. He pulled himself upright, using the ship's hull for support. He faced Vex with blood running down his face and fire burning in his eyes. He told the commander that he was not finished yet. Vex tilted his head in genuine surprise. He said that Danny should be unconscious. He said that any other species would have given up by now. He asked what was wrong with humans that made them so difficult to kill. Danny did not answer. He just raised his fists and prepared to fight. Before either of them could move, screamed. She twisted free from the soldier holding her and threw herself between Danny and Vex. Her small body trembled as she faced the towering commander. Her voice shook as she spoke. She told Vex to stop. She said that she would go with him willingly. She said that she was the daughter of the station administrator, and she knew that made her valuable. She offered herself as a hostage in exchange for Danny's life. Danny's heart stopped. He reached for her, trying to pull her back, but his wounded body would not obey. He could only watch as stood between him and death. Vex looked down at the small girl with something like curiosity in his yellow eyes. He said that her offer was interesting. The administrator's daughter would indeed be valuable. He could use her to force the government to pay a significant ransom. He glanced at Danny, who was still struggling to stay on his feet. He asked if she truly cared enough about this human to give up her freedom. Did not hesitate. She said yes. She said that Danny had saved her life when he could have run away. She said that he had protected her when everyone else had abandoned her. She said that humans were supposed to be monsters, but Danny had shown her that everything she had been taught was wrong. Vex considered her words for a long moment. Then he smiled that cruel smile and nodded. He told his soldiers to release the human. He accepted terms. Danny wanted to scream. He wanted to grab and run and never stop running until they were both safe. But his body was broken. He could barely stand. He could only watch as the soldier holding him stepped back, turned to look at him one last time. Her dark eyes were filled with tears, but there was no regret in her expression. She told Danny that it was okay. She told him that he had done enough. She told him to go home and live his life and forget about her. Danny shook his head slowly. He opened his mouth to tell her that he would never accept this. He would never let her sacrifice herself for him. He would find a way to save her even if it killed him. But before he could speak, a new sound cut through the smoke and fire around them. The sound of engines, the sound of weapons charging, the sound of rescue arriving exactly when all hope seemed lost. The patrol ship burst through the clouds above the landing platform, its weapons already firing on the positions. And in that moment of chaos, Danny saw his chance. The ship's weapons lit up the sky. Energy beams rained down on the positions across the station, forcing the raiders to scatter for cover. Commander Vex shouted orders to his soldiers, but the chaos of the sudden attack made communication nearly impossible. Danny did not hesitate. He lunged forward and grabbed, pulling her away from Vex before the commander could react. His wounded body protested with every movement, but he ignored the pain. Nothing mattered except getting to safety. Vex recovered quickly. He spun toward Danny with murder in his yellow eyes and reached out with one of his forearms. His fingers closed around Danny's ankle and yanked him to the ground. Danny fell hard, but he kept his grip on and rolled to shield her from the impact. The commander stood over them like a shadow blocking out the light. He said that Danny had made a mistake. He said that the ship could not save them. He said that Danny would die on this platform, and then he would take the girl anyway. Danny looked up at the towering alien. He looked at the scars covering Vex's gray skin. He looked at the cold certainty in those yellow eyes. And then he did something that surprised them both. He smiled. Danny told Vex that he had been beaten up by bigger creatures than him. He told Vex that humans did not know how to quit. He told Vex that he could keep hitting Danny all day long, but Danny would keep getting back up until one of them stopped moving forever. Vex snarled and pulled Danny to his feet by the front of his jacket. He raised his fist to deliver a killing blow, but Danny was ready this time. He grabbed a loose piece of metal from the ground and drove it into Vex's arm. The commander screamed and released his grip. Danny scrambled backward, putting himself between and Vex once again. The commander pulled the metal from his arm and threw it aside. Dark blood dripped from the wound, but he barely seemed to notice. He said that Danny had just made things much worse for himself. They fought. It was not a fair fight. Vex was stronger, faster, and uninjured. Danny was exhausted, bleeding, and running on nothing but stubbornness. But every time Vex knocked him down, Danny stood back up. Every time Vex landed a blow that should have ended the fight, Danny found the strength to keep going. Vex began to look uncertain. He had fought many species across many worlds. He had broken warriors and soldiers and fighters who were trained for combat their entire lives. But he had never fought anyone like Danny. He had never faced someone who simply refused to stop. Danny took another punch to the face and staggered backward. His vision was fading. His legs were shaking so badly he could barely stand. But he raised his fists again and told Vex to keep trying. He said that humans were built different. He said that they came from a planet that tried to kill them every day, and they had survived by being too stubborn to die. Behind him was screaming his name. She was begging him to stop. She was crying and pleading for someone to help him. Danny wanted to turn and comfort her, but he could not take his eyes off Vex. The moment he looked away would be the moment the commander struck the final blow. The sound of a vehicle engine roared across the platform again. Tessa came flying out of nowhere in the stolen transport and slammed directly into one of the remaining soldiers. She jumped from the vehicle before it crashed and grabbed a fallen weapon from the ground. Her shot hit the second soldier in the chest before he could turn around. Vex's attention flickered toward Tessa for just a moment. That moment was all Danny needed. He charged forward and tackled the commander around the waist, driving them both to the ground. They rolled across the platform, punching and clawing at each other. Danny ended up on top. He rained blows down on Vex's face with everything he had left. The commander tried to throw him off, but Danny held on with a grip that nothing could break. He kept hitting until Vex stopped moving. He kept hitting until he was sure the commander would not get up again. Then he collapsed beside the unconscious leader and tried to remember how to breathe. The patrol ship had landed on the platform. Soldiers in gleaming armor were pouring out and securing the area. More ships were arriving in the sky above, their weapons driving the remaining raiders away from the station. Ran to Danny and dropped to her knees beside him. Her tears fell on his face as she asked if he was alive. Danny managed to open one swollen eye and look at her. He told her that he was fine. He told her that everything was going to be okay now. An officer approached them with a medical team. He looked down at Danny with an expression that mixed confusion and respect. He said that they had received the distress beacon signal from the administrator's daughter. He asked if Danny was the one who had protected her. Before Danny could answer, spoke up. She told the officer that Danny had saved her life. She told him that Danny had fought an army of raiders to keep her safe. She told him that Danny was the bravest person she had ever met. The officer ordered his medical team to treat Danny's wounds immediately. He said that the government would want to thank Danny personally for his actions today. Tessa limped over and sat down beside Danny while the medics worked on him. She had cuts and bruises all over her body, but she was smiling. She told Danny that was the craziest thing she had ever seen. She told him that no one in the galaxy would believe that a human cargo hauler had fought a commander hand-to-hand and won. Danny laughed weakly. He said he did not believe it himself. The survivors from the reactor control room were evacuated over the next hour. His father was among them. He ran across the platform and swept his daughter into his arms, holding her like he would never let go, cried against his chest and told him about Danny. She told him everything. The administrator approached Danny while the human was being loaded onto a medical transport. He looked at Danny with tears in his large dark eyes and said that he did not know how to express his gratitude. He said that Danny had given him back the most precious thing in his entire life. Danny managed a weak smile. He said that had reminded him of someone he lost a long time ago. He said that he had been too slow to save that person, but this time he had been fast enough. He said that was all the thanks he needed. The administrator shook his head. He said that they would not forget what Danny had done. He said that every child on every world would hear this story. He said that Danny had changed how his entire species viewed humanity. Before the medical transport closed its doors, broke free from her father and ran to Danny's side. She climbed up beside him and wrapped her thin arms around his neck. She whispered in his ear that she wanted to be brave like him when she grew up. She said that he had taught her that being scared was okay as long as you kept fighting anyway. Danny hugged her back gently. He told her that she was already brave. He told her that offering her freedom to save a stranger was the bravest thing he had ever seen anyone do. The transport doors closed, and Danny was carried away to proper medical care. He would spend the next 2 weeks recovering from his injuries in a hospital. He would receive messages of gratitude from officials and ordinary citizens across the sector. He would become famous in ways he never wanted or expected. But none of that mattered to him. What mattered was a small blue girl with dark eyes who had looked at him like he was a hero when he felt like anything but. 3 months later, a council convened to discuss the incident at Outpost 7. They reviewed the reports and the testimony and the recordings from the station's remaining cameras. They watched a human cargo hauler run into danger when every instinct should have told him to run away. They watched him carry a wounded child through fire and smoke and enemy soldiers. They watched him stand back up after every blow that should have killed him. One council member asked the question that all of them were thinking. What drove the human to such extreme action for a child who was not his own? What made him willing to die for a complete stranger? Another council member studied the recording for a long moment. Then he spoke quietly, almost to himself. He said that apparently this was simply what humans did. And somewhere in the vast emptiness of space, Danny Cole flew his cargo ship toward his next delivery. On the wall of his cockpit hung a new photograph. A small girl with pale blue skin and large dark eyes smiled at the camera, her arms wrapped around a battered human who was smiling back. Some things were worth fighting for. Some people were worth saving. And sometimes the person who made the difference was just an ordinary man who refused to look away when someone needed help. That was the human way.